What is keeping these narratives alive? Why do people continue to share it and push it? And when you learn just how a lot of these stereotypes function,
Mhm.
um, you just it all boils down to dehumanization and humiliation in
Yeah.
order to exert control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think learning about the history really just allowed me and a lot of other people of color to take back that control, to be able to write our own stories and share our own experiences about what
Mhm.
our sex lives and our sexuality are like.
Mhm.
Because, to kind of tie it all back together, the love life of an Asian guy was that attempt for me. Dating a black woman, dating an Asian man doesn't mean that you've absorbed what it means to be them.
Mhm.
And so you have to, on your own, you have to investigate the social, the political, the cultural aspects of what your partner experiences, their
Mhm.
heritage, because that's part of your life now too.
Welcome back to session 117, Shrink Wrap with the love life of Asian guy, aka LAG, aka Ranier Maningding. Today's mood music is brought to you by Miguel Vogt from the soundtrack of Crazy Rich Asian.
Y'all, so we got a treat for y'all today. We love Ranier.
So excited.
Yes, we're so excited to have somebody famous on our podcast. So just to give you just a little bit of background about him, because he can definitely speak for himself, as we love his voice. Ranier Maningding is the founder and chief brand officer of LLAG Media, a branding and strategic communications agency for BIPOC creatives and progressives. LLAG Media works exclusively with BIPOC content creators, small business owners, activists, and nonprofit organizations to build sustainable brands committed to activating social change.
Mm-hmm.
How about that, LLAG?
Mm-hmm. Y'all welcome the love life of an Asian guy, aka Ranier.
Yay!
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for accepting our invite. We really appreciate it. This is something we've been wanting to do for a while. So we are super, super excited to have you and appreciate you taking that chance on us and with us.
Yes. Now, when we reached out to Ranier a long time ago and was asking him questions and he responded, y'all, we was so excited. You would have thought Janet Jackson had said something to us, because we was like, oh my God, somebody famous said something back to us.
It's the little things, that connection, and the fact that he's like interacting with his folks that follow him is so cool.
Yeah.
So we wanted to start off by asking, what do you have going on currently? What do you have going on in the future? What are some ways that if we were going to expand into your audience, we'd be able to figure out what you got going on?
Well, the past 2 years have been, quite the roller coaster. I started my branding agency right when COVID, came and disrupted all of our lives. And so I had, a short amount of time to kind of buckle down and jumpstart this business. And so it's been really fascinating meeting all different types of people, connecting with different businesses that I had no idea were within the network of our, LLAG community. And so now I'm just trying to have the agency grow. We're trying to reach out to filmmakers and lawyers and doctors and documentarians and politicians. And so I can't wait to see what happens. If the last 10 years of me running my community has been any indication of what might come to the future, then I just got to say that I'm really excited.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I think one of the things that we really appreciated about, we were followers originally, before we started working together. And I think one of the things that we really appreciated about you was your advocacy for, Black and brown individuals. So one of the main things that I was wondering was, what have you seen as far as changes in access to mental health for the Asian and or Asian American community?
So, I mean, I can only truly speak from the Asian American perspective, but I do have some thoughts overall. And I'd say that I feel like there's definitely more Asian Americans who are speaking about mental health. They're pursuing careers in mental health. They're developing brands and platforms designed to increase access to mental health services. But I still believe that the idea that mental health is even a valid concern is still heavily in contradiction to how a lot of Asian families were raised to believe that, emotions and your feelings about all this don't even matter, and that all that actually matters are the material successes, the material wealth. And so, in Asian communities, the idea of saving face is huge. And so, image and status and reputation and brand can be everything to a lot of these Asian families. And so, I've always talked about how a lot of Asian families sometimes feel like they're run like organizations and companies. And a lot of these families and parents will treat their kids kind of like employees. They'll feel like they need to dominate and control their life path at every step of the way, all in the name of, oh, well, we just want what's the best for you. We want you to go to a good college. We want you to make a lot of money. And I just think that this narrow-minded focus on material success just becomes the justification for a lot of toxic behavior. And so, when family members who do end up speaking up about this abuse and the stuff that's been happening in their family, when they do talk about it, they get stigmatized and they get pushed down for bringing these things up. And it just ends up further perpetuating the problem by forcing people in the family to hold in secrets and hold in different experiences because they don't want anybody to think that anything's wrong. And so although there are like more Asian American health professionals, we definitely need more conversations in terms of mental health in BIPOC communities and Asian communities, and just more education and information in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you think happens in the Asian community that will allow them to now start participating in mental health services? What do you think has changed?
I think what's ultimately changed is a lot of millennials and X-Geners are taking to social media because it's been sort of this alternative outlet outside of just like talking amongst your friends or talking amongst your family. But it's just been sort of this online journal of people like myself who talk about our experiences with mental health. And I mean, for me, over the years, talking about what I've gone through at work or in my family or in my culture has inspired other Asian people to say, you know what, I can probably talk about that too. I have a very similar experience. And I think that is ultimately what needs to happen. You just need to have a few people who are, the battering ram who can just crack the door open and leave some space for other people to feel like, hey, there's room for me to include my voice in here too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do you find that there are differences between first generation and second generation?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, first generation, whenever you get closer to the generation zero or whoever first immigrated, there's a thicker pad of armor when it comes to stoicism, when it comes to I can't let anybody see that anything's wrong. Like my mom is hardcore like that. And so as you go down the layers of the different generations, it becomes a little bit easier. But obviously that just means that the conflict between the generations also becomes magnified because you really start to see the differences in how some of those generations feel about themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're fine.
Okay. So how has the US influenced Asian culture positively and or negatively?
So I was thinking about this, and the impact of the United States on Asian and Asian American culture is massive. I mean, we really have to start with the history of U.S. colonization of the Philippines, our wars in Vietnam and Korea, the bombs that we dropped in Japan, um, all of this, which erased entire cities and cultures and knowledge that we'll never get back. And so I think that is the context that we first need to think about when we talk about any type of impact, positive or negative.
Absolutely.
And so, so much of that impact is shaped by that type of history. But speaking more from a positive note, I think we can really talk about anything from how early American cartoons like Mickey Mouse had a profound impact on the anime industry and how it impacted and shaped the formation of companies like Nintendo and the Japanese game industry. We can talk about Black revolutionaries like Malcolm X or the Black Panthers that had an astronomical impact on Asian American activists like Yuriko Uchiyama, Grace Lee Boggs, Richard Aoki. We can then move on and talk about the legacy of Black artists and musicians who basically built the blueprint for K-pop and the rebirth and the rebranding of the Asian nerdy kids to transforming that into giving them an avenue to be known as the spiky haired cool kids who could break dance and listen to hip hop. And so a lot of that is built off of that culture. And so, if you want to talk about it from a political standpoint, we can also talk about how Black and brown activists have essentially pushed through the culture and allowed immigration reform to take place, which opened the door for Asian immigrants to come to the United States. So, I mean, whether you're talking about it from a cultural, or political perspective, there's so many different ways that has had an impact.
Yeah. Just to touch on what you were already, segueing us into, our next question is, what are your thoughts on the intersection of Black culture and Asian culture together? Because I know Dr. Strickland and I's favorite movie is heavily steeped in that, which is The Last Dragon.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the intersection, I think one of the things that a lot of people have a misconception about when it comes to Asian and Black history and culture is that they think that the history only lasted about 20 or 30 years. They think of things like, the recent discussions and controversies happening around Stomp Asian Hate, or do you think about cultural appropriation, or do you think about Rush Hour, but even that is a complete limitation, because people then don't know about the LA uprising in 1992. They don't know about the shooting of Latasha Harlins. They forget about how Richard Aoki, who was a Japanese American, was a field officer in the Black Panthers. They forget about the Third World Liberation Front, which was a coalition of Black, Asian, Filipino, Latino, Mexican organizations that formed at my alma mater, San Francisco State University. And so this history goes back, like way back in time. But, our communities share a lot of really extra fascinating overlaps, whether it's martial arts or love for Bruce Lee, or even the fact that, our communities have been racially segregated into underdeveloped housing projects. Chinatown is that segregated neighborhood. And even, food, which is a really big love of mine. There's a lot of overlap there, whether it's like our shared intersection with seafood boils or curry and rice. So there's so much rich and vivid history there. And again, even that isn't enough. Like, you can go back over 100 years and you'll find stories about Black and Asian people who were put on display at the World's Fair, and people who were indigenous folks from Africa and from Asia who were captured and then sold into these shows for the entertainment of rich white people. So, the history it's deep, it's complicated, it's tragic, it's beautiful, it's upsetting, but I think overall, it's ongoing. You
Yeah.
know, it's important to remind ourselves that the history goes back far back when we look behind us, and also as we look forward. So there's a lot more history that will continue to be written.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So something that I was wondering about, so both Black and Asian culture, we have assimilation to whiteness, right? But do you find that younger Asian individuals are much more comfortable not necessarily following that route versus older Asian individuals, more wanting to assimilate and appear, kind of fall into that positive stereotype?
Mhm.
Um, Go ahead.
I was listening.
Oh, you took a breath, so it sounded like you were
No, I
moving.
was turning my face to
Gotcha.
look at him to talk.
So I'm just wondering, like, is that more of a age differential, or is that more just a personality differential? Like, what have you kind of seen?
There's a lot of interesting overlap because it could definitely obviously be a personalized thing, but it can also be a generational thing. It could be a regional thing, because there are differences between, when you talk about how a lot of Asian people who grew up in the Bay Area, like me, who grew up around other Asian people, and you didn't really feel like there was this absence of Asian communities. And you can compare that to the way that certain Asian people who grew up in Utah and Texas might feel, and it's totally different. And I found that you can see really interesting mixes. Like you could see Asian people who grew up in the Bay Area in a really diverse neighborhood who, because they didn't feel consistently ostracized for being Asian, they think that race doesn't matter. They feel like, well, I got through life, by my own hard work, and, race doesn't matter. Or you can have people who are in the Midwest who are Asian who grew up around all white people, and they feel like, oh, well, all my friends said that they don't see me as Asian. I'm just like one of them. So you find really interesting cases and exceptions of people who, if someone has the, to put it more bluntly, if someone has the bootlicking mentality of like, oh, I always want to, keep up with the Joneses, then they'll find that way. Whether it's them living in Utah and being around that environment, around a lot of conservative people, or whether it's just around being a very insulated bubble where we don't really actually consistently confront the reality of the race.
What pressures do you see on, just kind of the way the world is now on, I would just say young people in general, because I think we're all millennials. I think we're all relatively the same age.
I'm not a millennial.
We're Zennials and a Gen Z. I mean Gen X.
I was finna say
I was
no.
like, wait, who's a Gen Z?
I
Gen
know.
X.
I was like, oh, Ranier, you that
I know. I
young?
was like, wait a
No.
minute, Ranier is that young?
No, he's with us.
Yeah, no, I'm not a millennial.
But what do you see as some of the pressures overall for even the younger millennials and late Gen Zers, as far as, adhering to some of the pressures that we had when we were coming up? Do you see that it's a little bit lighter, a little bit heavier? Like what changes have you noticed as far as societal expectation?
It's really weird because on one hand you have the increased accessibility due to technology, and the way that different advancements in technology and communications have made certain things easier. It makes it easier to learn from other people, and it makes it easier to connect with other people and to find different routes that are unconventional. But at the same time, we also have to understand that how we've been operating, in particular in the United States, has been so unsustainable for such a long time that, whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about um, how we run our businesses, whether we talk about our debt crisis or our culture of white supremacy, so much of it has been unchecked because we've been sort of stuck in this everything's okay, everything will be okay kind of mindset. And now I think a lot of younger people are faced with the consequences of the ignorance of a lot of folks in previous generations. It isn't to say that, oh, it's all on them, but that's just the reality of the situation. And so I think the challenge for a lot of young folks now is to not lose hope, really, because so many young folks look at their options, and they look at how expensive college is and how little you get paid working at jobs, whether you're a minimum wage job or whether you're somebody who already graduated and have an advanced degree. And so I think a lot of younger folks, there can be an overwhelming sense of helplessness, and especially looking on social media, you see how well other people are doing, how rich this one person got doing one thing, and so it can be easy to constantly compare yourself to other people. And so I think the challenge is trying to redefine happiness, trying to redefine what does success mean, trying to redefine what a good career path is, trying to redefine what a healthy marriage is. So many things have changed culturally, politically, financially, logistically, whether we're talking about trying to find an apartment or trying to raise kids. And so there's just new challenges that we have to sort of think about. And I think that a lot more people need to stop trying to hound on young people for not doing things the way that they used to in the past, and recognize that that's because we have a new set of problems that requires a new set of thinking.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
One of the questions that you asked on your or that you posted one day was about asking children what they want to be when they grow up. And something you said just now kind of reminded me of that question, because it's like, if the world is changing and if, these children are losing hope, there is a different question that we do need to ask now. But I wanted to know, like, what do you think that different question is?
I, like a lot of millennials and X-Geners, grew up consistently being asked, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do? What are you going to be? Where are you going to go to college? And I mean, I remember the first thing that I would say when I was younger was I wanted to be the president, because I was just like, it's the most important thing ever. So I guess that's the best answer. I don't know. That was just the answer that I gave. And, it just, it speaks to the fact that that's such a heavy question for an adult, let alone a child. And so I like questions like, what do you like to do for fun? Because that grooves on a wavelength that kids can understand. Because a lot of kids are into weird stuff, whether they're into lizards or rocks or video games. And it's always interesting to hear from kids in their own language why they think it's fun, because there could always be these interesting nuggets like, oh, you like collecting rocks because you like the variety of them. You like to learn about how these things were formed and how it's connected to our ancient history and like all these interesting things. And I think that you can find just these little rabbit holes that you go on just based off of what they like to do for fun. And so I think that's a really great opening question. But I also think that things like, what's your favorite part about school? Because unfortunately, a lot of kids don't like school. And but there are moments that kids do like. Like for me, if you were to ask that question when I was a kid, I would always say, arts and crafts time. Like when we bust out the construction paper and scissors and glue, like that was my thing. Like I was amazing at that. So, and I mean, I guess if you follow that line of thought, then it would make sense why I'm now in branding and design. And another thing that I heard recently that I thought was a really good question is asking kids, how do you want to help people when you become an adult? As opposed to looking at it from the perspective of like, what are you going to produce? How much money are you going to make? What is the title that you're going to bestow upon your name tag? Because asking about how you're going to help people, it can be a career question, or it can be more of a question of values and vision of like, what is the overall impact that you want to make on the world? So I think those questions are pretty good.
It makes me think about at what point do we lose our sense of imagination
Mm.
and hope and fun and freedom? What stage in life does that happen? Does that
Mhm.
happen in adolescence? Does that happen in that transition from late adolescence into early adulthood? There is a moment where, you may not be cynical from a life perspective, but there is a bit of cynicism that kind of starts to develop once you get into adulthood. But like when, like,
I feel like
it
it
makes me
starts in
wonder about like
school.
what happened.
I think
Mhm.
it depends on the experience of the child, like their environment. Because if they are raised in an abusive home, in a neglectful home, or some sort, then they can lose that early
Mhm.
because they have to become an adult,
Yeah.
a little adult.
That's why I like the questions that you pose because they're different. It
Mhm.
keeps that life thirst alive
Yeah.
Mhm.
versus, like you said, pigeonholing you into a title.
Yeah.
Because most of
Mhm.
the things that we've all listed when we were younger were titles: teacher, doctor, lawyer, and they're
Mhm.
very specific
Mhm.
and very traditional.
Mhm.
And we all kind of have said the same things.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, yeah. And I was just wondering, like, I wonder what happens. Is it our parents? Is it,
Yeah. I mean,
TV? Is
even
it?
for me,
Exposure.
Mhm.
it's like LaFon, you were talking about, um, depending on the household, you can get introduced to that really early. That was the case for me, especially being in an immigrant family with 4 kids, me being the youngest, my mom always being at work. There's always this expectation that, like, all right, Ranier, you're on your own. You cook for yourself. You take care of yourself. You do all of that. And so, when I was younger, I just thought, like, okay, cool, I'm not a kid anymore. I can be like closer to being an adult. But then after especially when I got into my late 20s, I had the realization that, like, wow, I just kind of got shot out of a rocket, and I didn't really have the chance to enjoy some of the things that I should have as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, I was talking to my wife, and she would talk about all the different cartoons and shows that she watched, and she was like, "Oh, like, you didn't watch any of that?" I was like, "No, I didn't watch any of that because I felt like I had to work on my art and learn how to do design and essentially start building up my career at a really young age." And so, yeah, it definitely has a huge, profound impact.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Mhm.
Just in general, because I think about similarly, my father was not very vocal, but he always had a presence that he had an expectation of you're going to succeed.
Mhm.
So then there's this pressure of, okay, well, I better do something that's going to be successful. I don't know what that thing's going to be, but I better do
Mhm.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes some of those unspoken kind of rules and expectations that get put out there, how that changes who you are, how you see the world, how you experience the world, interact with the people around you, and shape who you end up becoming as an adult.
Oh yeah. I mean, I grew up um, being naturally into art and visual arts, but because my family, is a traditional Filipino family, they're all about, you know 90% of the people in my family, they're all into nursing. And so there was that pressure of, like, this is the path, it's already established, you should probably go ahead and go to it.
Yeah.
And so I had to stash a lot of those dreams and aspirations of getting into art and design because I was, especially in the 90s, there was always this idea of, like, okay, unless you're going to be Bob Ross, like, you're going to be a starving artist. And so, yeah, it has a huge, it definitely puts you on a different trajectory than, what you probably really want to do.
For sure.
Wow. Mm. Okay. Where we going?
So, just kind of keeping with the idea of like vision and, how we have expectations and how we interact with the world, see the world. We've had some pretty big things happen in the last week or so.
7 days.
um, that have had some pretty big coverage and a lot of talk around it. So just thinking about taking that kind of macro level influence, right? So we have our micro level influence, which would be our family, friends, things like that. And then we have macro level influence, which is outside TV, media, things like that. So with that said, we recently had the death of Queen Elizabeth, and that has kind of overshadowed and taken over
Everything.
everything.
Yeah. And she's not over here.
So what are your thoughts on like American culture and our focus on what's happening with the
The royal family.
Yeah, the royal family, because it's not just the queen, it's the whole gamut.
Yeah, it's something that I've been posting about this past week, and I think it's really interesting because a lot of folks look at the life of Queen Elizabeth as this like, glamorous, aspirational thing that we need to like weep and cry about. But and also thinking about how her death has overshadowed so many things, and people have been talking about how coverage of some of the deaths in their communities and some of the tragic things that are going on have been totally overshadowed by the Queen. And I think for me, it's like the tragedy of Queen Elizabeth is this is somebody who was born in 1926. She was there when she was alive when the first automobiles started to be commercially developed, and she passed at a time when we've already have the technology to begin the process of colonizing Mars. And to think about the enormous gap in progress that has happened over time, and then you think about you're the face and the benefactor or the beneficiary of the British colonial empire, and within the almost 100 years that you've lived, what have you done? What is the totality of your impact? You're not just some random schmuck who like just it's unfortunate you just didn't aspire to your greatest potential. No, this is somebody who had every amount of access to do anything at any time. And so I just think about how having that much power and just squandering that opportunity is wasted potential. I think it is a life, in my opinion, it's a life not well lived. I saw an article recently about how here are 5 reasons or 5 ways that Queen Elizabeth quietly took a stand. And I'm like, first off, why quietly? Like, there's no repercussion. They're not going to take your crown for like speaking up about something quietly. And some of the reasons were like, oh, she drove a car in a country where women aren't allowed. I was like, okay, cool. Another one was like, she wore a pin that Barack Obama and Michelle Obama gave to her when she met Donald Trump. And I was just thinking to myself, like, okay, so you're the queen of the the British colonial empire, and that is
about the longevity of that.
Yeah. And
I
so
saw a video or something about, I guess Snoop Dogg had gotten in trouble over there, and she spoke up for him. And I was like, well, did she know who he was? And I was like, why Snoop Dogg? I mean, I'm glad, but why Snoop Dogg? It was just weird, like that random news.
I don't think a lot of the British were prepared for the BIPOC community to be fine with her passing.
Yeah, because when the BIPOC community, like Queen Latifah, like wait a minute, no.
Yeah, we were just. I was like, okay. I literally text my mom, and she was like, "Oh, about time." Not in a bad way, it's because
because she's old.
Like this is normal. Like that's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
You live a long life, hopefully, and you die.
I was wondering why she was still the queen. Like, why you hadn't been stepped down?
They don't live up there.
what?
They don't do that.
You
there.
got the dye out? I
Yes.
didn't know. I would be like, I'm 70, honey. Get me out of this. What
But-
is this?
Funny.
But you got to think about who her son is. It's
There's a lot. But I'm thinking about what you said, Ranier, about, when she was born versus, the long
Right.
up until when she passed. And for most of us, we only know her as an old woman.
Mhm.
Mhm.
We don't have a recollection of Queen Elizabeth when she was 40,
Right.
Mhm.
and when she was really, out there making decisions and doing things and
And was vibrant enough to
vibrant
do 'em.
and affecting the world.
Yeah.
We've
Mhm.
only known her as this old lady with these hats and a purse, and
Mhm.
she's just kind of
Her
and her
pearls.
pearls. We don't know her as a ruler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think for the young, especially maybe late Gen Xers,
Mhm.
millennials, and definitely Gen Z, there's really no tie. We don't have a frame of reference for
No.
really who she is,
Yeah.
other than
Yeah.
Queen Elizabeth.
And then there's been this huge opening up of the dirt that
Mhm.
is connected.
Yeah.
Of course, most of us are always going to know Princess Diana and, that whole situation.
And even Meghan Markle.
Yeah, but I'm saying like we know that for certain. But then you get to talking about the genocides, you get to talking about how many blood jewels they still have, and just all, and it's just like,
Mhm.
okay, well, this is happening.
Right. So I
Mhm.
do agree with you. Like all of this time that has passed, you haven't made anything right. You haven't returned any spoils that was stolen or kept, or like you haven't made any effective changes over here, which is why I don't understand how her passing overshadowed people over here. Like
Mhm.
anybody.
Mhm.
It could have been our next door neighbor. Anybody.
Mhm. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So sad.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I
And
don't
that's
understand
just,
a whole lot about her.
that's the unfortunate, um, that's the unfortunate tragedy of life. It's like you could be a very wealthy person who does nothing, and you'll get, a million people coming to your funeral, but you could be a person who is making lasting, real change, but because people don't know you as much, because you're not as rich, that impact won't be as well known.
Yeah.
So true.
And the thing about it is, our hearts go out to her family because, of course, regardless of how we view her, her family still loved
Yeah,
her.
that's still somebody, mama,
Yeah.
auntie,
Yeah.
granny, great
Mhm.
granny, all that.
Yeah.
But as the monarch, that doesn't really hold a lot of weight for many
Right.
countries,
Right.
Yeah.
But, to segue into our next part with, thinking of the relationship that she had with Meghan Markle and her grandson Harry, and she has said herself several times that she did like her. The media did not like her, or it still continues to not like her. Uh, what recommendations can you give to other interracial couples in combining the cultures? Because that can be a difficult thing for people from two of the same cultures, but you got these two on opposites. You got the American and the British. You got the biracial kid that's a celebrity actress, and then you have this military white ginger dude. So what are your thoughts on that?
I a lot of my work early on the Love Life of Nation guy was about interracial dating, and so I think that the prevailing recommendation that I'd have um, for a lot of interracial couples is don't mistake yourself for being this superior third eye seeing interracial person, because I think that there are too many people who think that their interracial relationship makes them wholly unique, like supremely intelligent and hot because they were able to cross over, and that because I was selected, I'm better than somebody of the same race as their partner. And so I just say, don't assume that being with someone means that you understand their people. There are way too many people who are like, oh, I'm with the Asian dude, so I get it now. Like, you get what? Dating a Black woman, dating an Asian man doesn't mean that you've absorbed what it means to be them. And so you have to, on your own, you have to investigate the social, the political, the cultural aspects of what your partner experiences, their heritage, because that's part of your life now too. And so you should be able to have a deep understanding of that experience, especially since, if you're going to have children one day, then that's going to be integral to your children's identity. And you're going to be able to have to pass that knowledge on, or else you end up with a lot of these perpetually confused mixed race children who are like, what am I? And so, I've always loved this idea that mixed children or interracial couples shouldn't have to look at themselves as fractions, as I am 50% of this or I'm 50% of that, meaning I can't be fully proud of this because it's not entirely me. I saw this book in the Japanese market, the Japanese bookstore, and it was like a booklet of a bunch of biracial Asian people, and there are a bunch of photographs of these people, and then they wrote down a message. And one of the messages that always stuck with me, like just for years, was a photo of this dude who was half Black and half Japanese. And the only thing that he wrote was 100% Black, 100% Japanese. And I loved that perspective of just not seeing yourself as like, multiple fragmented pieces coming together and piecing together this broken individual. Like, no, like you're a complete person. You can be fully in love with your Black culture. You can be fully in love with your Japanese culture. And so you should be able to feel like you can be wholly yourself in all different parts of that culture. No one side should be hidden or obscured. You should understand and learn the good and the bad parts of it, the differences and similarities, and also recognize that interracial couples, you can start new traditions and write new narratives. It doesn't have to just be based off of this shallow understanding of stereotypes or trying to break those stereotypes.
So when you're dating and you're of the same race, it's difficult to communicate because people don't know how to communicate. But when you date in interracial relationships, do you think there needs to be a different type of conversation, or just conversations still just need to be had?
I think that's where the understanding of the different cultures really comes into play, because I remember when I was in community college, I was in a class called Dialogues Across Differences, and they were talking about just the ways that different cultures communicate. The way that more Western cultures wear their opinions on their sleeves, whereas in a lot of Asian cultures, they reserve that. And it isn't to say that, okay, every Asian person I talk to is going to be like that, but it just provides the context so you know that, okay, my partner is talking this way and they're being very emotional. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're mad. It's just that they have a different style of communication. And so I think understanding communication styles, understanding how culture impacts those communication styles, like, that also has a profound benefit when it comes to understanding your partner's families, because that's an entirely different thing that you end up having to deal with, because your partner might have shades of connectivity when it comes to how they communicate relative to their culture, but their parents might be like the hardcore version of that. So it definitely helps to understand some of those differences.
I think that's important. As you were kind of talking about all of this, it made me think about this video that I saw on YouTube the other day, of a man that was Black and Japanese, and him and a white woman they live in Japan. Well, he's from Japan, but she is an expat. And they were walking around the street, and they were doing the whole thing where like they pretend they don't know how to speak Japanese and just wait for people to say something, and then they speak in Japanese, and how many people looked at both of them and said, "Oh, your Japanese is so good." And the guy was like, "Well, no, I am Japanese." And they kept continuing to tell him, "Oh, but your Japanese is so good." And he was like, No, I am Japanese." And it was just like it just there was this disconnect. So he then had a little bit of an interview piece later on, and one of the things that he talked about was the struggles that his father had. His father was Nigerian and his mother was Japanese. And he talked about the struggles that his father had and the struggles his mother had while he was growing up, along with the ones that he had. And it was so funny to hear how different all of their experiences were. That, his mother's struggle was, people not believing that he was her son. And then, his father was kind of like the perpetual foreigner. And then he, people not believing that he was, Japanese, because his primary language was Japanese. So, he was saying that people, the struggle with people not believing that he was Japanese and still trying to maintain internally like a sunny disposition and not become cynical to his environment, because there was a very small, especially at that time, a very small subset of individuals that were I can't remember the word he used for half Japanese, half black. It was some specific word, but I can't remember what it was. But he was saying, it was really difficult to maintain a positive, healthy outlook on himself and the world.
Oh yeah, I mean, you end up caught between two different worlds, and sometimes you feel like you don't fit in either. And so, especially if a lot of folks just aren't speaking up about those experiences, then you can just end up feeling like you're in limbo and you have no one to talk to, no one who understands your position, and it becomes even more tricky when you're in a culture like Japan where like you said, you are a perpetual foreigner, and you'll always just be doubted in that way. And so, yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. Dang. That made my heart hurt for him. As I was watching, I was like, "Oh, that's so sad."
Oh yeah.
So then what about for yourself, as an Asian man, what have you seen or what have you experienced as far as stereotypes, belief systems from, the people in your environment?
I mean, throughout my life, there have been so many different stereotypes that I've had to try to understand and really unpack. Because when you're younger, you hear a lot of this crap, especially being a young boy, being on the internet, growing up on the internet, and people just lobbing racial slurs and crap at you. And so there are so many different fronts, from whether it's the emotional stereotypes about what it means to be Asian mentally, or in terms of your relationship to other people or sexually. And so, when it comes to mentally and emotionally, there have always been these stereotypes about Asian people being robots, having no emotions, not having valid opinions, and that has contributed to a lot of Asian people's input in organizations or schools just not being valued, and us being seen as primarily workhorses. You're only valued based off of your output and your productivity. And so, I had to learn how to value my own emotions. I had to learn how to share my own candid opinions, so that way I could empower myself, essentially, because I knew that, okay, I can do this, and hopefully I could pass that on. When it comes to different relationships, there have always been stereotypes about Asian people not being trustworthy. There's the yellow peril stereotype, if we want to go into the deep propaganda of it, or this idea that Asian people only care about other Asians. And so for me, I reconciled with that by making sure that I built my community and my platform towards bridging gaps between different communities, forming new connections, creating new experiences together, and really just connecting over some of that shared history. And I think obviously one of the most prevalent stereotypes, there have been so many ones about Asian men and women sexually, as whether Asian women are painted as uh, uh, sexually promiscuous deviants, or Asian men are sexually incompetent. And so I had to learn about, like, what are the origins of some of these forms of racial propaganda about Asian bodies, about Asian sex. And I had to learn how to unpack white beauty standards so I could actually have a full context of, like, what is keeping these narratives alive? Why do people continue to share it and push it? And when you learn just how a lot of these stereotypes function, um, you just it all boils down to dehumanization and humiliation in order to exert control.
Yeah.
And so I think learning about the history really just allowed me and a lot of other people of color to take back that control, to be able to write our own stories and share our own experiences about what our sex lives and our sexuality are like. Because, to kind of tie it all back together, the love life of an Asian guy was that attempt for me. I was 18, 19 years old when I came up with the concept, because I was like, you know what? There's not enough media about what it's really like being an Asian guy who's single, trying to, date and find a partner. And there were too many stereotypes about Asian men being awkward and, being nerdy and nobody likes them. And so I was like, you know what? I want to start a platform where I'm just, like, really brutally honest about the dates that have gone bad, poorly, the dates that have gone really well, the times that I've met somebody who I was really enamored by and I got my heart broken, or the time that I met my future wife. And so I think, it's important to understand the stereotypes so you can learn how to write your own narratives, write your own stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I have my sex therapy clients come in and they are talking about, hey, we want to learn how to do the Kama Sutra, or we want to learn how to do tantric sex. And I'm like, well, I'm going to send you to somebody that's Asian, because that is their culture. Yes, I can teach you that, and I will teach you, like, the basics, but my resources are typically someone who is steeped in the culture that we are essentially appropriating. Because when you see that and you learn about that end of relationships and sexuality, it is typically some Caucasian man educating people. It's the same way in the yoga community. That is an Asian practice. That is not California white people, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, most people can't even say like the asanas and all these different things that go on in these practices. And I think I'm seeing more of a thirst for people to understand where things come from and know it, the roots of it, not just learning the techniques. And I'm glad that I'm seeing that shift, and I'm also glad that we get to be a part of that change, giving that back over to the different communities that deserve that.
And it belonged to.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I have always thought was interesting, something that you were talking about a little bit earlier about, stereotypes about Asian men and Asian women. It made me think about how the stereotypes for Black women and Black men, Asian men and Asian women, we're on the, like, complete opposite extremes. That Black men are heavily sexualized and fetishized, and then Black women are, either
Sexualized and
the
objectified.
Jezebel, we're nymphomaniacs, that kind of thing, or we're super prudish. It's either one or the other. And then, like you were saying, for Asian men, it's on the opposite end of that spectrum. And I have wondered if recently, because I've seen a lot more, I don't know if this is because of social media, more Asian and Black couples coming together. And I've wondered if it's part of some of that. We've been so marginalized by all of these other white, most likely, cultures, is that we've found some camaraderie with one another and have been able to come together. And I understand that experience, you understand that experience, and now we have some common ground to start from.
And can create bonds from that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love it because that goes back to one of the fundamental sort of narratives that I feel like exists within white supremacy that has been used to marginalize Black and Asian people, which is this idea of the Goldilocks method, where if I, as a white person, want to position myself favorably, then I just need to position Black folks on one end and Asian people on the other end, and I'm seen as the happy middle. So if Asian people are very deficient in one area and Black people are super sufficient in another area, then we are in the middle. We're normal. We are, we're how you normally should look. Your body should look how your sex should be like. And so, I think it's like you talking about that shared understanding. I've heard that from so many different Asian and Black folks who talk about how, even though we might not have the same experiences, we understand what it feels like to have your narrative hijacked, and for people to force a narrative about what they think your body is like, what they think being with you is like, what they think, being intimate with you is like. And that's, again, why we have to always go back to, where does the narrative come from? What is the, where does the story actually begin? Because unfortunately, for so many of these stereotypes, it begins with a white person authoring that story and then disseminating it and pretending as if that is the gospel of what it means to be us.
Yeah. Something that always stands out in my mind is that the victor always gets to tell the story of the captive. And it's not until more recent years where the descendants of those captives, across the board are kind of taking those stories back and trying to understand what is real and what isn't. And you're like, oh, okay, that was fake. Y'all been telling me this fake story for all these years.
Oh, and they sweating bullets. They trying to hold on to these lies.
I can't tell you. I went to an event last night, and it was for the premiere, an early premiere of the Warrior Queen, or the
Woman King.
The Woman King. Let me get my English together. And when I tell you the energy that you feel in watching that movie,
I saw it last night.
I was crying. I was like, I need to get it together. These people gonna think I'm crazy. But it was like you could feel, and no, the story was not without blame. It told the real story of how there were some African participants in the slave trade, but it also told this story of redemption. It told this story of getting your life together, facing your demons and different things like that. And those are not the stories that a lot of people of color get to see. We see the enslavement. We get to be the funny sidekick, or the person with the bad attitude, or the sexy seductress. Like, we don't get a lot of
the story inside of the story.
Yeah.
It was several stories because I saw it last night. So it was several stories within the story. And it's like, oh man, that was okay. Oh yeah, that was okay. So it's like, oh yeah, I like that. Okay, that's part. We're gonna come back to that. Okay. Okay, I know what that okay. And it was just about the culture. And just to see the rituals and the movements and y'all know I love dancing, so the dancing, the drums, it was just it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And those are things, like you were saying, Ranier, that they have tried to steal from us. That's a part of our culture and identification that they tried to steal, and we've allowed them to hold on to it until recently, more recently. And now we're getting more with Black people, with Asian individuals. All of us are trying to understand us better now, and not believe the big lie.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, even just thinking about Queen Elizabeth, it's like, in order for her image of this glamorous queen to have existed, it was predicated on our ancestors being positioned as the monster of her story, as being
Wow.
the animals, the rats, the gorillas, and the evil force of her story. And so I think what's happening over the last 20 years is people of color are realizing that what is the story within the story. We've heard it from this perspective of the white knight, but like what actually happened. Let's talk to the actual people and allow them to really claim that story.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Man, well, I think that's a great stopping point. Well, we definitely want to say thank you again, Ranier, for taking time out to do this with us. This has been an honor and a pleasure. So if you don't mind, one more time, just telling everybody how they can, find you, where you're located, so that they can go and follow you too.
Of course. So if anybody wants to go ahead and follow me, you can follow me on Facebook, The Love Life of an Asian Guy. I'm also on Facebook at LLAG Media, or you can go ahead and visit LLAG Media on YouTube. I'm on TikTok, Instagram. I'm not on Be Real yet, but I'm out here. So you can definitely find me if you're interested in working on branding. If you're a BIPOC creative or progressive, reach out to me. I'd love to help.